The woman moved through the October cold, the way someone moves when they have stopped expecting the weather to care about them. Not hunched against it, not fighting it, just walking, with the slow and particular patience of a person who has learned that warmth is something you find when you find it, and not a moment before. Her name was Daphne Kessler, and she had been on the road since Moose Jaw. She was not running, not riding, just walking, steady and deliberate, along the rutted track that came north from the main road and ended, though she did not yet know this, at the gate of Tallow Creek Ranch. Her boots were cracked at the left heel. Her coat, a man's coat, brown wool gone thin at the elbows, was buttoned wrong at the top, where one button had been replaced with a length of dark thread tied in a careful knot. She carried a canvas sack over one shoulder and wore a hat pulled low against the prairie wind. She had no horse, no wagon, no companion. She had the look of someone who had been alone long enough that solitude had stopped feeling like a condition and become simply the weather she walked in. Ingrid Brandt saw her from the kitchen window. Behind Ingrid, her husband Otto sat at the table with the ranch ledger open in front of him and a cup of tea gone cold beside it. He had the expression he always wore when the numbers refused to add up to anything encouraging, which had been most mornings this autumn. "Someone coming up the track," Ingrid said. "Rider." "No, on foot." That made him look up. In 22 years on this land, 22 years of Saskatchewan wind and Saskatchewan winter, and the particular brand of Saskatchewan stubbornness it took to stay, they had seen plenty of people come up that track. Neighbors, traders, men looking for work. But a woman alone on foot in October was something different. Otto Brandt was 64 years old and built like the land he worked, broad and square and worn smooth in the places where the years had pressed hardest. He came to the window and stood beside Ingrid, and they watched the woman reach the gate and stop. She took off her hat, just that, a small old-fashioned gesture and somehow exactly right. Then she looked at the house, and at the barn, and at the sheep visible in the far pasture beyond the ridge, and Ingrid could see her, looking the way a person looks at something they are trying to understand before they speak about it. Taking stock, measuring. Then she walked to the door and knocked. Ingrid opened it. Up close, the woman was younger than she had appeared from the window. 28, perhaps, though the kind of 28 that prairie hardship tends to produce. A face that had been pretty once and was still striking, but with something settled in it, something that had moved past the age of being surprised. Her eyes were gray and direct. There was a scar, faint and old, along her left jaw. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. She held her hat in both hands. Her voice was steady. "My name is Daphne Kessler. I've been working my way north from Moose Jaw since September. I can see from your fence line that you're running sheep." She glanced toward the pasture. "I can see from here that your near pasture gate is hanging wrong. It's off the top hinge. When the snow comes and it settles, you'll lose the latch entirely. I can also see your water trough by the north barn has heaved on one side. It'll crack by January." She looked back at Ingrid. "I know sheep. I know fence work, water systems, and how to read weather on the open prairie. If you let me stay and work, I'll ask for meals, a place to sleep, and nothing else." Ingrid looked at her. Behind her, Otto came to the door, and the woman's posture shifted the way it does when the person with final authority enters the frame. Not afraid, just more attentive. "Where are you coming from?" Otto asked, not unkindly. He looked at her the way he looked at most things, slowly, without hurry, like he was reading something written in a language he knew well but respected enough not to rush. "I was in Moose Jaw. Before that, a sheep station near Swift Current. Before that," she paused, "various places. Working or drifting." She considered this honestly, both at different times. "What do you know about sheep specifically?" "I know the whole of it. Lambing, shearing, foot rot, fly strike in summer, hypothermia in winter. I know how to move a flock and when not to. I know what a ewe sounds like when she's in trouble and what she sounds like when she's just complaining, and the difference matters. She met his eyes. "I know how to do things right. I won't cut corners, and I won't disappear." Otto looked at Ingrid. Ingrid looked at Otto. 22 years of marriage had made this a kind of shorthand that needed no words. She saw him start to shake his head. They had let someone stay before. A young man 3 summers back who had seemed capable enough and turned out to have a gift for finding reasons not to work. And before that, a fellow who had gone through 2 months of meals and a warm bed before simply walking away without a word, taking a good wool blanket with him. The refusal was forming on Otto's lips, natural as frost on glass when it happened. From the south pasture, from the direction of the far gate, came a sound that both of them knew immediately, and neither of them ever wanted to hear. Not the ordinary complaint of sheep kept past their supper, not the shuffle of a restless flock. This was the sharp, carrying panic bleat of animals being pushed somewhere they did not want to go, layered under a lower sound, a sound Ingrid placed a half-second before her husband did. The creek. The October rain had been heavy that week. The south branch of Tallow Creek ran high and cold, and the bank on the near side was soft with it. If the flock had moved toward the low point in the south fence, Daphne turned before either of them spoke. She listened for 1 full second and said, very calmly, "Your flock is moving toward water. If the south fence is compromised and they've pushed through, you've got perhaps 8 minutes before the front animals reach the bank, and sheep do not back up from a push." She looked at Otto. "I need a horse right now." Otto gave her the horse without deciding to. He simply pointed at the roan mare in the near corral and said, "Take her." And Daphne Kessler was already moving. She could ride. That was the first thing Ingrid noticed, watching from the fence rail with her hand pressed against her sternum. Daphne had the roan moving before she was fully seated, not recklessly, not with anything to prove, but with the kind of ease that belongs to people who learn to ride the way other people learn to walk, as though the horse and she had already discussed the matter and agreed. She went over the ridge and out of sight. Otto climbed up beside Ingrid on the fence rail without a word. They waited. 19 minutes later, Daphne came back over the ridge with the flock moving in front of her in a tight, calm group. Ingrid counted twice, not 1 animal short. Trotting at the left flank of the flock, with the intense focus of a creature who has finally been given work equal to his capabilities, was Pip, their 3-year-old sheepdog, who had apparently made a decision somewhere in the last 19 minutes about where his professional loyalties now resided. He glanced at Ingrid and Otto as he passed with an expression that could only be described as satisfaction. Daphne brought the flock into the north pasture, latched the gate, and rode back to where the Brandts were standing. She dismounted and handed Otto the reins. "The south fence is down in one place," she said, not breathing hard. "But there's a second section, east of the water gate, that's been pushed from the inside. Something's been testing it. Could be your lead ram. If he's restless going into winter, he'll find every weakness in the line." She looked at the barn. "I'd want to walk the full perimeter in the morning." Otto looked at his sheep. He looked at the woman. He looked at Ingrid. Ingrid said nothing. She didn't need to. "There's a room off the back of the barn," Otto said. "Small, straw tick, a good blanket, a lamp. There's a basin on the peg by the door." Daphne nodded. "That's more than I had last night." "Supper's at 6. We don't wait on it." Understood. Ingrid watched her lead the roan back to the corral, remove the tack with clean and practiced movements, check the mare's left foreleg before turning her out. Every step correct. Nothing performed about it. The kind of competence that doesn't need anyone watching. She turned and walked back toward the house. "I know," Otto said behind her. She hadn't said a word. In the weeks that followed, Daphne Kessler made herself quietly indispensable in the way that certain people do, not by making a show of effort, but by seeing what needed doing and doing it, without commentary and without waiting to be asked. She repaired the south fence line from end to end, working alone with wire and fencing pliers in weather that would have excused most people from trying. She fixed the water trough, not patched it, but rebuilt the heaved section properly, using stone and mortar mixed by hand, so it would hold through freeze and thaw and not need looking at again until spring. She found the weakness in the barn roof that Otto had suspected but not yet located, and spent a cold November morning replacing shingles with the single-minded attention of someone with something to prove, though to whom exactly was not entirely clear. She was exceptional with the sheep. She had that quality, the rarest of all ranching gifts, the ability to move through a flock without disturbing it, to read the group's mood the way an old sailor reads the sky, to know from the way they stood and the way they held their ears, whether they were hungry or frightened or simply bored, and to respond to each condition the right way. Otto watched her work the flock one gray November morning and said nothing, but Ingrid saw his face. She recognized the expression. It was the look he got when he encountered competence so natural it moved him past assessment into something closer to wonder. She did not let herself think too long about who else had moved him that way. Daphne ate supper with them every evening at 6, never late. She was quiet at the table. Not the tight defensive quiet of someone guarding something, but the quieter of a person who listened more than she spoke and found conversation more interesting as a result. She asked questions about the land, where the water table ran in a dry year, which pasture went to mud first in spring, the questions of a person building a thorough map in her head, learning a place the way you learn a person, slowly over time, from the things it tells you without meaning to. Otto answered her, a little more each evening. Ingrid watched this and said nothing, and thought several things she kept to herself. Because there was something about Daphne Kessler that she couldn't entirely settle, not a wrongness, nothing like that. The woman was honest. Ingrid had 61 years of instinct on the subject and not a flicker of doubt about it. She worked without supervision. She never entered the house uninvited. She treated them with the kind of quiet respect that isn't performed and can't be faked, the kind that lives in small gestures, waiting at the door, asking before changing anything, calling them Mr. and Mrs. Brandt until Otto told her, gruffly, to stop that. No. What Ingrid couldn't settle was simpler than dishonesty and harder to name. It was the way Daphne never talked about where she had come from. Not with deflections, not with the sharp evasions of a person hiding something criminal. More, the way a person keeps off a wound that is not yet ready for air. The careful steering away from certain directions. Saskatchewan, working various places since she was 25. 3 years of silence in those 2 sentences. 3 years that had turned a young woman into someone walking alone through an October prairie with a cracked boot and a coat that wasn't hers. One evening in late November, with snow pressing against the kitchen windows and the lamp burning warm on the table, Ingrid set down her mending and said, simply, "Daphne, what happened before Saskatchewan?" Otto looked up from his book. Pip lifted his head from the rug beside the stove. Daphne was quiet for a long moment, looking at the lamp flame. "My husband and I filed a homestead claim," she said at last. "East of Regina. We'd saved 3 years for it. We broke ground in the spring of '84. A pause. His name was Peter. He died the following January. Fever." She did not look up from the flame. "I tried to hold the claim on my own through the second spring. I didn't know enough yet. The money ran out before the harvest. I let it go in August of '85. The fire moved quietly in the stove. "I had $12 in what I could carry," she said. "I've been working sheep stations and fence lines since then. Trying to," she stopped, started again. "I don't know what I've been trying to do. I only know I couldn't stand still." Ingrid picked up her mending. "You've been trying to find something worth stopping for," she said. "Most people who keep moving are." Daphne looked at her. Ingrid did not look up from her needle. "There's no shame in it taking a while," Ingrid said. "None at all. Now, if you have been paying attention, you have noticed something." Daphne did not ask for sympathy. She did not perform grief. She stated the facts of her life in the same tone she would use to describe the state of a fence line, and then she was quiet. That quality, the refusal to use pain as currency, is rarer than it looks. It is worth noticing. The man who arrived at Tallow Creek in December was not the kind of man who announced himself as a threat. He came in a good coat on a good horse, with a measured voice and a card from a land office in Regina, and he introduced himself as Harlan Geddes. Otto knew the name. He had heard it twice in the past year. Geddes had approached him once in town and once by letter about the Tallow Creek property. Both times Otto had declined, the second time not entirely politely. And now here was Geddes at his gate again, with two men riding behind him who wore their hats low and sat their horses with the professional stillness of men paid to stand near conversations and make them go a particular way. Otto reached for his coat. "Wait," Ingrid said. Ingrid. She was already going to the barn. Daphne was awake. She was standing at the barn door with her coat on, looking at the three horses at the gate with the same attentive calm she brought to everything. Pip was pressed against her leg, every muscle quivering at a frequency below sound. "You know those men?" Daphne asked. "The one in front has been trying to buy this ranch for a year." Daphne was quiet a moment. "Is Mr. Brandt going to do something that makes this worse?" Ingrid almost smiled. "Despite everything, he is considering it." Daphne stepped out of the barn. She walked to the gate at an even pace, her hands at her sides, nothing hurried about her movement. She stopped at the fence and looked up at Geddes without squinting. "Help you," she said. Geddes looked at her from the saddle with the expression of a man who has not expected this particular complication. He was perhaps 50, well-fed, with a careful beard and the smooth hands of someone whose hard work is always done by other people. "I'm here to speak with Otto Brandt." "Mr. Brandt isn't available. I manage operations at Tallow Creek. You can speak with me." A beat. "And who would you be?" "Daphne Kessler. I've been running this property since October." She let that sit for a moment. "If you have business with Tallow Creek, you have business with me." The two riders behind Geddes exchanged a brief glance. "I have an offer for Brandt," Geddes said. "A fair one. The land isn't producing what it once did. He's an older man. A prairie winter is hard on older men. I'm trying to help him see what's practical." His tone was even, reasonable, the tone of someone explaining the obvious to a person who simply needs more time to understand it. "Mr. Brandt's best interest," Daphne said, "is for you to take your offer back to Regina." Geddes looked at her without irritation. That was the telling thing. He did not become irritated because he did not consider her an obstacle worth irritation. He considered her a minor complication, the way a man considers a gate left latched when he expected it open. "Miss Kessler, I don't think you quite understand the position you're in." "I think you've misjudged mine," she said. One of the two riders shifted in his saddle. Because Daphne Kessler was standing at a fence in the December dark alone with no visible weapon, and she was not afraid. Not managing fear, actually unafraid, the way an animal is unafraid when it has decided that this is where it stands, and it will not be standing anywhere else. The two riders were professionals. They had spent years reading men and women in situations exactly like this one, and they felt the difference between a person performing calm and a person who simply was calm, the way you feel the difference between a photograph of a fire and a fire. "There are 3 of you," Daphne said, "and 1 of me at this fence. But inside that house is a man with a rifle who has been looking for a reason to use it for a year. And there is a woman inside who has been on this land for 22 years and will defend it the way people defend the things that have cost them everything." She looked at Geddes without blinking. "Do you want this property enough to bleed for it tonight?" The silence stretched. The prairie wind came off the flat land and moved through the dark between them. Geddes looked at Daphne for a long time. Then he looked at the house, at the lit window where the shape of Otto Brandt was visible, backlit with the rifle. "This conversation isn't done," Geddes said. "Come back in daylight," Daphne said. "I'll have coffee made." Geddes turned his horse. The other two followed. The sound of hoofbeats crossed the dark and faded into nothing. Daphne stood at the gate until the last of it was gone. Then she turned around. Otto Brandt was standing on the porch with the rifle in the crook of his arm, looking at her with an expression Ingrid, watching from the doorway, had not seen on his face in years. She knew what it meant. She had last seen it looking at their son Henrik, before the accident, before everything that came after. She did not stand in that memory for long. There was no use in it, but she did not look away from it either. Some things you carry, and they carry you in return. That night, Otto opened the bottle from the back of the shelf. Not the ordinary whiskey. The good one, the one that came out only for things that warranted it. He poured 2 glasses and pushed one across the table to Daphne without preamble. She looked at it, then at him. "You stood your ground," he said. "They would have come back harder if I'd shown them any give. Men like Geddes read softness the same way water reads a crack. They find it, and they work it." "I know." Otto turned his glass. "I've been showing him no give for a year, but a year wears at you. When you're doing it alone, it wears at you faster." He was quiet a moment. "I'm 64 years old. I've got 300 acres, 200 head of sheep, and I cannot work it the way it needs working. I knew that going into this winter. Geddes knew it too. That's what gives men like him their patience. They wait for the ground to soften. He'll come back. He will. Then we should make a proper plan." Otto looked at her. "We?" Daphne was quiet. Something moved across her face. The careful look of a person approaching something that matters and wanting to approach it without rushing it. "I lost my husband's homestead," she said. "Ours. The one we built together. And I made bad decisions afterward when I was grieving and alone and didn't know enough yet, and I have thought about those decisions every day since." She looked at him steadily. "I don't want to watch someone else lose theirs, because they didn't have enough hands." The stove made its quiet sound. The lamp held steady. Otto was silent for a long time. "Our son died 9 years ago," he said at last. "He was 26. He would have taken this place on. He knew it the way I know it, the way you know something you've been learning since you could walk." He looked at his hands on the table. "You've been asking the same questions he used to ask, about the water table, about which pasture holds in a dry summer. I didn't know that." "No." Otto finished his glass, set it down. "I have a solicitor in Moose Jaw, a good one. I've been thinking about something since October, since you fixed that water trough without being asked, since you asked about the east pasture drainage the same way Henrik always did." Daphne waited. "Work this ranch with us through the winter," Otto said. "In the spring, if it's still working, if you still want to stay, I'll have the solicitor draw up a partnership agreement. A real one. 25% of the operation, not wages. Ownership." He looked at her steadily. "In 10 years, when I can't do this the way it needs doing, you'd have first right to purchase the rest. At a fair price, not a distress sale." The room was very still. "Why?" Daphne asked. "Because you know what you're doing," Otto said, "and because you stood at that gate tonight, and you were calm, and you didn't do anything foolish, and you didn't need me to come out and help you, though I was ready to." He turned his glass in his fingers. "And because this land deserves someone who will look after it the way it deserves to be looked after. And I think you might be the person who'll do that." Daphne looked at the table. Her jaw worked once. She didn't look away, and she didn't try to compose herself into something tidier. She just let it be there, the thing that was true, showing on her face, the way honest people let true things be visible. "I'll earn it," she said. "I know you will," Otto said. "That's why I'm asking." Ingrid set down her mending across the room. She stood, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a 3rd glass. Because Otto had poured only 2, which he had been doing in one form or another for most of their marriage, and some things a person simply continues correcting, because the alternative is letting them go uncorrected forever, which is worse. She sat down at the table. "Well," she said, "now that that's settled." And for the first time since October, Daphne Kessler smiled. Not a polite smile, a real one, the kind that reaches all the way up. Geddes came back in January. He brought a younger man with a surveyor's satchel and a folder of documents and the tone of patient, reasonable inevitability that people use when they have decided the outcome and are merely waiting for reality to agree. He found Daphne at the near gate and Otto at the barn door, and Pip stationed at the property line with the concentrated intensity of a dog who takes his responsibilities more seriously than most people take their professions. Daphne said, "Tallow Creek is not for sale. We are registered with the land office in Moose Jaw as a partnership operation. Any future correspondence should be directed to our solicitor there, whose name and address I will write down for you if you'd like." Geddes looked past her at Otto. Otto looked back at him with the rifle in the crook of his arm and 22 years of possession on his face. Geddes left. He did not come back. The winter was exactly as hard as Otto had predicted. 3 weeks of cold that cracked the water lines and kept the flock penned tight and made every morning a negotiation between what needed doing and what the body had left to do it with. Daphne worked through it without complaint, which Otto noticed without saying so, which was how respect moved between them, quietly, through what was observed and acknowledged without needing to become words. By the time March arrived and the first green showed along the south fence line and Tallow Creek ran cold and clean under the last shelf of ice, something had come back to the Brandt place that had not been there in a long time. Not the absence of grief. That had always been there, quiet in the background like the sound of the wind. Ingrid still walked up to the hill behind the north pasture some evenings and stood at the marker stone and said things into the open prairie sky that were hers and Henrik's alone. Grief doesn't leave. Anyone who has carried it long enough knows that. It simply learns to share the house with other things. But the other things were there now. The sound of 2 people working the barn in the early morning talking about pasture rotation and the spring lambing count and the price of wool in Moose Jaw, the sound of Pip doing his perimeter rounds with tremendous self-importance, the sound of supper at 6 and the conversation that ran longer now, ranging across the land and the seasons and the slow accumulation of plans that stretch past a single winter, past a single year. The sound of a place that had found its footing. On the first warm evening of April, Ingrid found Daphne sitting on the top rail of the south fence, watching the ewes move through the new grass in the low late light. She climbed up beside her. Her knees reminded her of their opinion on the matter, but she managed. They sat for a while without speaking. "You wrote to someone," Ingrid said. It wasn't a question. She had seen the envelope on the kitchen table that morning, addressed in Daphne's careful hand. "My sister, in Manitoba." Daphne was quiet a moment. "We lost touch after Peter died. I wasn't good at being found for a while. I think I wrote to her because I finally knew what to put in the letter." "And what did you tell her?" Daphne looked out at the pasture. At the south fence, straight and solid, every post driven true. At the water trough by the north barn, rebuilt so well it would outlast all of them. "I told her where I am," she said. Ingrid looked at the flock grazing in the long spring light. "When Otto and I came here," she said, "we had nothing. 2 trunks and a mule and a piece of paper that said we owned something we hadn't built yet. I was 39 years old, and I spent that entire first winter convinced we had made the worst mistake of our lives." She paused. "But I'll tell you what we had that I didn't understand until much later." Daphne looked at her. "Somewhere to be responsible for," Ingrid said. "Somewhere that needed us. That's different from somewhere to stay. Somewhere that only shelters you, you can always leave. But somewhere that needs you. Something that asks something of you every single morning." She stopped, thought about it a moment. "That changes you. It asks something of you every day, and you become the kind of person who answers. And once you've become that person, you can't really go back to the other kind." Below them, the ewes moved through the new grass in the April light. Pip made his rounds. The prairie sky held its enormous blue, clear, all the way to the horizon in every direction the way it only is in spring, before the summer haze comes in. "I know," Daphne said. She did. She had known it, she thought, since October. Since she had walked up a track in a cracked boot with nothing left to lose, and a woman had opened a door before she was entirely certain she deserved to knock on it. You don't always know the moment the drifting ends. Sometimes the road just quietly stops being the point, and you only recognize it when you look back and see how far behind you the last bend is, but it ends, and when it does, it ends for good.